So let's do Kapitel Chaf. The schus of the tune. The Eibishter should send his brachas, miracles, Eretz Yisrael. See the total, complete victory of Eden. Lam Natsayach Mizmor David. Yanu Chadinoi B'Yom Tzora. Yisagev Choshem Elohei Yaakov. Yishlach Ezecha Mikodesh U'Mitzion Yisadeka. Yizker Kol Mechasecha Ve'eloscha Yidashna Sela. Iten L'chochel Vavecha V'cholatzoscha Yimali. Neranu Rabbi Shuvasecha U'L'Shem Eloheinu Nidgel. Yimali Adonai Kol Meshalesecha. Ata Yudaiti Ki Yeshia Adonai Meshichi. Ya'arnehu Mishmei Kodshe. B'gureis Yesha Yemini. Eile V'rechev, Eile V'asusim. Anachnu B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Nazki. Heima Koro B'Nafolu, V'anachnu Kamnu B'Naseidud. Adonai Yeshia Melech Yaneinu V'Yem Kareinu. Of course, all the Yidden should be safe. Soldier, it has to do, everyone should come back home. Gesundheit. Okay, we're now doing the last part of the Maimer. Page 8. So let's start again from the Zehu. Page 8. Zehu. Now we go back to the original pasuk that the Maimer was based on, where that pasuk is in this week's parsha. It's the bracha that Yaakov gives to his son Yosef, and he says, "Vani nasati lecha, and I have given you Shechem echad alachecha, a portion more than your brothers. And what I've given you, according to another interpretation, is referring to the city called Shechem, that this is your city and this is your portion. Asher lakachti miyad Rameri b'charbi b'kashti. I took this, means I conquered it from the tribe called Amori, and I did this with my sword and with my bow and arrow." So the war is not an ordinary war. The war is a war conquering and overcoming, defeating Klippa. And what he's saying to Yosef, "I give you more than your brothers," indicates that Yosef at Tzadik's spiritual level was much greater than his brothers. In what way was it different? In what way was it greater? And that's what he's going to explain. Halichas Yaakov Lavan. Yaakov was traveling to Lavan, who Avedis Habirurim. This was part of the Aveda of elevating the sparks. In other words, just like we know about Mitzrayim, that when the Jews were in Egypt, that spiritually the purpose behind that was that the sparks of the world of Tohu fell in Egypt. And by them being there and going through the suffering that they went through, doing that, they elevated those sparks. In the times of Yaakov, before they went to Mitzrayim, where were the sparks? The sparks were by Lavan. Now you might ask a question, what do you mean they were by Lavan, or the sparks were Mitzrayim? The sparks all over the world. Everything in the world comes from the world of Tohu. So there are sparks in every tree and every blade of grass, every animal, every grain of sand, everything in the world, every star everything in the world has sparks. What does it mean the sparks were Mitzrayim? Or what does it mean that the sparks were by Lavan? So if you might remember when we were learning the mimer before about the sparks, hopefully you do remember, we explained then that there's no way that we actually touch physically every single thing in the world that has a spark of godliness in it. There are, with even, years ago, for sure, our access was very limited. How much of this world did we even know about, discover? But even now, there's still so much place and so much in the water, in the depth of the ocean, and in jungles and mountains and all sorts of places. People don't go there. People don't daven there. People don't do mitzvahs there. So how does all that get elevated? Anyone remember the answer to that question? There's a mountain somewhere, and who knows where. No one ever went there. Or, like I said, a jungle. No one ever goes there. And if someone goes there, it's not the people that make brachas and daven and learn shitas. So how does that area in the jungle get elevated? Right. So it has to be that when we do what we do here, it elevates the sparks there. And how does that work? So we explained it's like a head and parts. It's like a tree and branches. Or to use an example of current, current things in today's world, that you can either walk over to, if you have a building like the Empire State Building with 100 floors, you can either walk over to every single floor, turn on the switch in every single room, and that's one way of doing it. There's another way. You go down to the basement where there's a main switch. You turn that down, all the electricity on the 100 floors, every single room, every single office, every single outlet, every single light, every machine gets shut off. Because that one thing is the source. From there it goes to all the others. But that's one building. There's another building. And there's another building. So basically the idea is that there are, in the sparks, there are details, and there's sort of the head of the spark. Hashem, by his Hashgacha Pratis, sends Yidden into Galus where those main sparks are. So now that most Jews live in America and in Eretz Yisrael, that means the sparks are mainly there. And by us elevating the sparks in these places, it could affect a place that's hundreds of thousands of miles away because it's connected. It's a network. And therefore, when it says that the sparks were mainly in Mitzrayim, of course the sparks were in the whole world, but sort of the headquarters of the sparks, the head, the source, the power station of all these sparks were in Mitzrayim. And that's why they were able to elevate 202 sparks. And in the times of Yaakov, earlier, it was by Lavan. So he went there to elevate the sparks. And the way to elevate the sparks is the Bezei Fanim. One is in a way that there's a war and a confrontation, and the other is in a peaceful way. What does peaceful mean? Because of the light that's shining. The Bechlol is generally speaking, the Shvatim, the way they elevated the sparks is through Mulchama. And Berur the Yosef, the way Yosef elevated the sparks is B'derech Menucha, in a peaceful way. What does that mean? Generally speaking, there are two ways to influence, to make something happen. One way is a way that you are engaging whatever it is that you're dealing with. You're working with it. And the other way is that you're not working with it. You're doing whatever you're doing, and the results happen by themselves. If I put a pot on the fire that something should cook, is the fire doing something specific to make the food cook? No, the fire is burning. But if I put a pot near the fire that's burning, then what's going to happen is the food will get cooked. But I won't say that the fire is engaging with the food in the pot. When a teacher is teaching a student, that's different. They have to know who the student is, what the student's capacity is, what their knowledge is, what their background is, what they could understand, what they can't understand. How do I speak to them? How do I explain it to them? And that means that you are engaging with that person. You're getting involved with the person. You're actively adjusting yourself to that person. But there are things like, say, the sun shines. When the sun shines, things grow. People are warmed up. A lot of places have now light and they can see all these results. The sun is not involved in doing it. The sun is shining. Once the sun is shining, all these things happen automatically. That's called b'derech menucha. That is not, you're not dealing with anything. You're just doing your thing, and the results are happening by themselves. What does it mean spiritually? So b'derech menucha, we understand that there's actually a confrontation. Let's look at the words inside. When there's a war, gam kishikoichir rav, even if he's strong, there's gaber ala sein, and he can overpower the enemy, or the natzchi, and he can defeat the enemy. Al kopanim, nevertheless, it's not so simple. A lot of effort has to be involved. He has to put in and invest a lot of energy. Ad Hashem is Gaber al Seina, until he's able to overpower the enemy who's fighting with him, and then he can defeat him. But it involves getting involved, and I have to be focused on that, and have to fight, and have to bring out all the koyal that I have. But when there's birurim in a way which is peaceful means there's nothing there that's disturbing me. There's nothing there that's getting in my way. I don't have to gather strength to do this. I just do my thing, and the rest happens by itself. There was a chassid in the previous generation. His name was Rabbi Masmid. Those who know in the neighborhood here, Mrs. Groner, she was the wife of Salang Yer of Rabbi Groner, the Rebbe's secretary. This person was her grandfather. Probably it's assumed that he was, in terms of a chassid and avodah, someone who worked on self-refinement, he was probably be considered on the top of the line. In other words, he was like a Beinei of Tanya. That's how people looked at him. So he lived in Russia with all the chassidim. And then he came to America. I think it was to collect funds for Tenketum. So first of all, he told the Frierdiker Rebbe that he's afraid to come here because America was then called Treifa America. It's like an impure place. People come here and they lose their Yiddishkeit. He didn't have a lot to be worried, but he was worried because he was such a great person. He felt that, in such a place, it shouldn't affect me. And for that, the Frierdiker Rebbe gave him his shtreimel. He said to wear his shtreimel, and that'll protect you. So that was a very unusual thing. But I heard this, I didn't see it in writing, but I heard it from someone that says it's authentic. He asked the Frierdiker Rebbe while he's here, should he also get involved in teaching people and reaching out to people, which we know that's what we do now. But the Frierdiker Rebbe told him, you do your thing. You used to daven for hours. There were times where he davened Shachris. By the time he finished Shachris, it was time for Mincha. By the time he finished Mincha, it was time for Ma'ariv. Then he sat down to eat breakfast after Ma'ariv. Not every day, but there were times he got so involved in his davening. So he said to him, you do your thing. And his term was in Yiddish, and then naturally, the other person will be illuminated. In other words, the way a light affects. A light doesn't deal with the darkness. Doesn't get involved with the darkness, doesn't make an effort to reach out to the light just shines. The light shines, then naturally the darkness goes away. So that's one kind of Aveda, but only someone like that. People that are not on that level, their light is not so powerful that it should naturally just push away the darkness. You have to make more of an effort, you have to get involved. So therefore, if someone's on a higher level, he can do the Berurim B'derech Menucha in a peaceful way. The one that's on a lower level can only overcome the opposition by getting involved with it, wrestling with it, and eventually bringing him down and overcoming it and defeating it, and then you could elevate those sparks. So in general, this is the difference between, so I started to say this the other day, it says in Chassidus that on Shabbos, one of the malachas is Beir. Anybody know what Beir is? I'm sure you know what Beir is. So Beir means you're not allowed to choose the good from the bad. And Chassidus explains the reason for this because on Shabbos, we don't do Avedis HaBirurim. During the week, we go to work. We do business. We handle with money. We go out there and we do all the mundane things. The purpose is to elevate the sparks. Shabbos, we don't do things like elevating the sparks. So therefore, the halach is, you're not allowed to be beir, which is really extracting the good from the bad. The concept of, in fact, the word is the same. In Hebrew, what is it called, elevating the sparks? Avedas habirurim, the same word. But what happens on Shabbos? It means Shabbos has so much kedusha, so much holiness in it, that I don't have to deal with the sparks. I'm making kiddush. I'm davening. I go to shul. I do all the things that you're supposed to do on Shabbos. Whatever needs to be elevated is naturally elevated without me getting involved with it. So it's not that Shabbos, nothing's happening to the world. On the contrary, it's such a holy day. But the way Shabbos affects the world is different than the way I affect the world during the week. During the week, I have to go down to the place of materialism. And I have to deal with money, with buying, with selling, with eating, and dealing with people. And very often have to deal with people who are not Jewish, people who are not acting the way I act, and have to deal with them because of my occupation. But on Shabbos, I'm in the shul, I'm in the home, I'm in davening, I'm learning, I'm doing the ruchnius, and everything that needs to happen happens b'derech menucha. Another example of the two things is David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech. Who was the one that built the Beis HaMikdash, David HaMelech or Shlomo HaMelech? But in some places it says David HaMelech, or at least a tribute to Beis HaMikdash to David HaMelech. So the explanation is that David HaMelech really made all the plans. He prepared everything, how it should be built and what way it should be put together. But Hashem said to David, I don't want you to actually build it. Your son Shlomo, he will build it. Why? Because in David HaMelech's times, there were a lot of wars. And he was fighting with those that were enemies of the Jews, especially the Plishtim. If you read all the stories in Tanakh. And Hashem said, your hands have blood on it, and I don't want the Beis HaMikdash should be built with hands that have blood on it. Now, we're not talking about blood, chas v'shalom, because he did something wrong. Whatever he did was necessary to do. Whatever he did was by Hashem's, he was a Navi, by Hashem's orders and Hashem's messages. Hashem told him to do it, and it became part of Torah. It's in the Tilim, it's in the Tanakh, but it's nevertheless blood. So Hashem said, I don't want the Beis HaMikdash to be built with hands that shed blood. What about Shlomo HaMelech? Shlomo HaMelech is the opposite. It was a peaceful time. And in fact, it says in Gemara, he was called Shlomo because the word Shlomo comes from the word Shalom, which means peace. He lived in a time where there was the epitome of peace. There were no wars. And this brings us to another thing that we don't find, that Shlomo HaMelech even went and traveled places. So many different people, kings and leaders and rulers came to him. So this is how Chassidus explains it. That in the times of Shlomo HaMelech, especially when he built the Beis HaMikdash, the light was so powerful, it's like having a candle versus having a huge bonfire. That when you have this big, huge fire, the light goes very far. When you don't have such a big fire, then in order to light up someplace else, the light has to leave its place and go there to bring light there. But if you have a huge flame or a torch or, like I said, a bonfire, then it stays where it is, and the light is so strong and so bright that it reaches far away. Shlomo HaMelech's light reached the entire world. Anything that needed to happen, on the contrary, they came to him. Another example of this is comparing the Baal Shem Tov to the Mezritcha Magid. The Rebbe speaks about this a lot, that the Baal Shem Tov used to travel a lot. So many stories about Shem Tov is he would take his students, go in a wagon and travel here and travel there. He traveled to a lot of different places. The Mezritcha Magid hardly left his city altogether. In fact, the Rebbe compares it to Avram and Yitzchak. Avram Avinu traveled a lot, that's in the Chumash. Yitzchak never left Eretz Yisrael. And it says the reason is because he was supposed to be a korban, Oila, and a korban is not allowed to leave the Holy Land, so he had to stay there. So Yitzchak didn't travel, and Avram did travel. So it's a different kind of Avodah. To a certain extent, we see that with the Rebbe also, that all the Rebbeim traveled. The Alter Rebbe, the Mitter Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, Rabbi Marash especially traveled over to countries, different countries outside of Russia. The Friedrich Rebbe is not even a question, the Rebbe Rashab. Our Rebbe hardly traveled. The only place he traveled to was to visit the children in Camp Gan Yisrael. And even that, rumor has it that the Rebbetzin asked the camp to invite the Rebbe because she wanted the Rebbe to just get some fresh air, go out into the country. But the Rebbe went there 2 or 3 times. When they asked another time, the Rebbe said, I still didn't make up all the lost time from my previous trip, so I can't go anywhere. But the Rebbe was here. Yet, you can say that the greatest people in the world came to the Rebbe, got advice from the Rebbe, got guidance from the Rebbe. All the my stories you read are people who established yeshivas, institutions, organizations, all sorts of things that they did all over the world by coming to the Rebbe, getting advice, and then going and doing it. So there's 2 different ways of how to elevate. Either you go out to the place where the spark is, and if you do that, there's a confrontation, or you are where you are, but your light is so bright that naturally it elevates everything else around you. In this Maimer, he does not explain this, but it's the next Maimer, I think, or maybe it was a previous Maimer, where he says that this is also the difference between mitzvahs and Torah. Mitzvahs, you're dealing with the gashmis. You have to take gashmisdik food, make matzah out of it, and make a bracha on the matzah. You take a gashmisdik lulav and esrog, you make a bracha on the lulav and the esrog. Take a gashmisdik shofar, and you make a bracha on it. So all the things that we deal with when we do mitzvahs are things that are klipas noiga, they're permissible, but they're not mitzvahs, and we have to develop it into becoming a mitzvah. So we take the wheat and we bake matzahs, and we take this fruit and we make it into an esrog, that's the mitzvah. There's another way of elevating things in the world through learning Torah, which means when you learn in Torah about certain things, let's say you learn a question in halacha, whether this meat is permissible or this meat is treif, or this thing that this person does is acceptable or is violating Shabbos. When I learn about all these things, I'm elevating all these things that we're learning about. You learn about a person who does an Aveira. Is it an Aveira? What's the punishment for the Aveira? While we're learning about it, there's a whole chapter in Tanya where he talks about how learning about certain subjects, by learning about it, you're actually elevating those subjects that you're learning about. That's the power of Torah. But the big difference is, I'm not involved with it. I'm talking about somebody that killed someone else, and whether he has to go to Golos or not, whether he gets this punished or not. I'm talking about vicious things, but I'm not involved in that. It's not something that's happening in actuality. So I'm basically in a realm of Torah, and by learning about it, naturally it's sending its light to everything else in the world that's klippa. So the big difference is that when you're learning about certain things, even if it's sholish klippas atmeis, even if it's absolutely not kosher, treif, 100%, it's somewhat elevated through the learning Torah. But you can't do that through mitzvahs, because when a person does mitzvahs, you're getting involved with it. We can't get involved with things that are shalosh klippas atmeis. That's too low. If we go down that low, it'll bring us down. So we can only deal with things that are permissible. But when you're learning Torah, you can even elevate and have an effect and an impact on things that are absolutely not kosher. Why? Because it's remote. Torah is bringing things from remote, and mitzvahs is by going there. I mean, today they have wars, they have missiles, they have planes that are being flown from different places in the world. You have somebody sitting in California, and he's guiding a plane on the other side of the ocean. So the actual plane is involved, but the person who's guiding the plane, he's sitting in a comfortable office, in front of a screen, and he's making things happen because he's away from it. So that's the difference between Yosef and the brothers. So it's really incredible because Yosef was actually in Mitzrayim and he was in the palace. And Mitzrayim was the most impure, immoral place in the world. But he was in a whole different level, so he didn't get involved with it. He was able to elevate it to B'derech Menucha. It did not disturb him whatsoever. Last line on the page. Between the Aved of the Shvatim. They were neshamas of Biyah. The Shvatim, their neshamas came from the worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. So they weren't on that high of a level. Yosef was neshama of Atzilus. Yosef's neshama was from the world of Atzilus. The neshamas, the Biyah, those neshamas that come from Bria, Yetzirah, Asiyah, Avedasam, B'derech Mochama. Their Aveda is they have to deal with the opposition and they have to fight with it. They have to wrestle with it. Be Yagiya, they have to really work hard. With Tirdat Suma, it's very disturbing and ultimately can overcome it. But the Neshamas that Atzilus, those Neshamas that are from Atzilus, they're in a different spiritual realm completely. Avedasam b'derech menucha. B'derech oir elyon. They shine their light, which is a very powerful light, and then naturally things get elevated. And this is the deeper meaning of what Yaakov told Joseph. To the Yosef, the neshama Atzilus, being that you are a neshama of Atzilus, so therefore you have something which makes you superior to your brothers. Their neshamas are from Biyah, and your neshama is from Atzilus. Therefore, he's giving him a different, greater portion, which means he's giving him more work to do in the Aved of elevating the sparks because he has a much greater capacity than his brothers. And that's what the word Shchem Echad means. I was explaining how is this in the words Shchem Echad. The Gam B'Shchem. So before we said Shchem means a portion. Then we said Shchem is the name of a city. Now he's introducing a third interpretation. Shchem means shoulders. Shechem in Hebrew means shoulders. Hu HaKotev. Yi Hamshachas Echad Hu Alachecha Shelamayla Miberur V'Biyah. Abel Hu Alachecha Shetzarech Liz V'Seid B'Adraga. What does the shoulder have to do with anything? He doesn't explain. Generally speaking, shoulders represent the midas. Because the right shoulder is the source of the right arm, which is chesed. The left shoulder is the source of the left arm, which is gevura. And the chesed and gevura, they include all the different midas. And that's what needs to be elevated more than anything else, are the midas. Remember we said the world of tohu, where everything fell apart, and there was the clashes, and it couldn't be contained. That was all in the world of midas, where there was so much going on without the union of meichen, without the union of intellect. So it means that that's a place that needs to be elevated. So he tells Yosef, you have a portion above your brothers. I don't know if you remember in the beginning of the Maimer, one of the questions he asked was, What does it mean you have a portion over your brothers? He just should have said you have an extra portion. By saying over your brothers, it's as if your portion is like your brothers, but at the same time, it's superior to your brothers. So he's saying, yes, it's true that first you need the Aveda of the brothers. Shetzarachli is Beseda V'Hadraga. In terms of Aveda, things have to work with a gradual process of progression. First, you need to be Birur and the Biyah. First, in other words, you need to do Birurim on the simple level. And then you can have a higher light, that you can bring echad, which means bring down godliness into the world. So that's another point. And so therefore Yosef comes after the brothers. That's what the pasuk means when he says you have an additional portion upon your brothers. I mean, first comes the avodah of the brothers. Like a person, when he does the avodah, doesn't start off like being a tzaddik. First, he's an ordinary person. He works on himself, and he has to deal with things b'derech milchama. He could reach a level later that he's so high and he's so bright and he has so much light of kedusha that he no longer has to deal with it in a confrontational way. He could deal with it in a way of menucha. So first comes Bria Yitzia Asiya, and then you can reach the higher level of Atzilus. Then Yaakov said, and I took it from Amori. What's Amori? The Dibur. The word Amori is literally a name of a tribe, but it comes from the Hebrew word Vayomer or Omar, which means speech. What does speech have to do with it? So again, we know from other Maimarim that the 7 nations are 7 klippas, 7 different kind of klippas. And each one represents, altogether they represent anything negative that could possibly be. They're included in these 7. Ameri is connected to speech. In Yadibra Mutter, even speech, which is permissible, but they're just idle talk, words that have no purpose, no meaning, just babbling. A person's speech should be that he's engaging in words of Torah, words of davening, not b'dvarim b'teilim. Dvarim b'teilim means just speaking words that are in vain. And that's what it means. I took Emori with my sword and my bow. And the Targum says, with my davening and my requests. And how can a person do this? So Rashi says, which means through Chochmah Limud, through learning about the godliness of Hashem, and you do that before you daven, and then you daven. So through Chochmah, through Tefillah, you're able to transform the Dibur of Ameri, the speech of Ameri, which is the strongest of the 7 nations. And you can do that through Tzalusi Ba'usi. So Mefarshim say that Ameri was the strongest of all the 7 nations. Okay, physically, obviously they were mighty warriors. What does it mean spiritually? Especially if we understand that it has to do with speech. What does it mean speech is the strongest? So it's explained in other places that what's the highest thing in a person is the chokhmah, is the seichel, right? We have 10 faculties. The highest faculty is chokhmah. The power of speech comes from a place in the soul that's deeper than chokhmah, much deeper than chokhmah. And this explains why a person is called medaber. On the surface, it's very strange. There are 4 categories. So basically, there's inanimate, which means there's no life there, doimem. Then there's chai, sameach, which is plants. Then there are animals. Then the 4th level should have been called humans. Instead, the 4th level is called medaber, those that speak. Is that what the human is all about, that he could speak? The main thing in a human being is that he has seichel, that he's intelligent. And there's more intelligence in a person than there's intelligence in an animal. So that should be what makes a person superior in the 4th category. Why medaber? So one of the answers to that is the reason why medaber is because the power of dibur, to speak, comes from a deeper place in the nefesh than the power of intellect. And there are a lot of Maimarim that they explain this at length with a lot of details. One of the main points that is brought out is that we see that when a person speaks, this generates more intellectual energy and generates more emotional energy. First of all, we see this with emotion. I would think the opposite. Let's say if a person has a certain feeling, let's say a person is on fire with love for Hashem, and another person says the words in davening, "V'haftas Hashem alakecha." What kind of match is it? Words compared to emotion. Emotion is real. I'm on fire with love for Hashem. The words are external. I'm just saying, "V'haftas Hashem alakecha." It doesn't take much to say the words that I love you, Hashem. So I would think that words are external, and words really are insignificant compared to emotion. Yet the fact is that when a person verbalizes their emotions get much stronger than they were before. And that's why it says in certain Sfarim, one of them is Reishis Chochma, very famous sefer, and that's Chassidus and Musar together. And he writes that if a person is angry, what should they do? If they feel that they're losing their temper, they should not speak. So if you ever hear about people that they count to 10, that basically means they don't speak, they count to 10. And some people count to 20, and some people need to count to 1,000. Depends how angry you are. Because what happens is when you're angry and you speak, I would think speech is just external. But what happens is the anger is 10 times stronger when I'm speaking than I was before. With Seichel, we find the same thing. That when a person understands a certain subject of Torah, and I'm sure it doesn't only apply to Torah, but to any subject, and then they speak, they're talking to someone, they're explaining it to another person. I would think that, again, this is just external. I'm explaining it to them. But as you explain it to the other person, the teacher will find that they have now more depth and more knowledge of the subject, more understanding of the subject. They perceive it much deeper than they did before as a result of their speaking. In fact, very often a teacher is contemplating before, I'm going to teach this to my students. I'm thinking, so how would I explain this? How would I explain that? And they can't think of a good way to explain it. And any teacher could probably testify to this. And as they're teaching, while they're speaking, something comes to you, and wow, this is perfect. How come I couldn't think of it before? Okay, I didn't. No, it's because of the speech. The power of speech, because it's deeper than the seichel, it actually could bring the seichel to produce more depth than without the speech. So speech is really very powerful. It's powerful in the positive and powerful in the negative. Someone once wrote to the Rebbe that sometimes he has thoughts that come to him that are, it's inappropriate thoughts, but he just can't understand where in the world is it coming from. It's not that he was thinking about these kind of things, he was reading books about these kind of things. They come to him. Where and how does this happen? Just out of the blue. And the answer is, and the Rebbe says in place in Chassidus, that speech reaches deep, deep into the neshama. So therefore, if I ever had any kind of association with anything, even if it was years ago, and it's deep in my subconscious, but it's there. When a person speaks, it reaches into the deepest parts of the soul. So therefore, if I speak positive things, it'll bring out deep positive energy. And if I sometimes speak in a negative way, it could bring out deep negative energy, things that are buried deep in the nefesh. So that's what it means when it says that Ameri, because how could it be stronger? It's only speech. But if I understand that it's actually its source and its roots are in the nefesh, deeper even than intellect, that it means that it's stronger because there's nothing higher than intellect, and this is even deeper than intellect. So through positive speech, which is words of davening, words of learning, words of tilim, I can bring out the parts and the depth of my neshama that's even deeper than my seichel. And through the negative, chas v'shalom, you bring out the opposite. Okay, so tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to go over, I think I gave you the sheets. If not, I'll give it out tomorrow. We'll go over the questions, the terms, and everything else.
Right. If you have, for example, a fear or a negative emotion and you speak about it, so you're better not to speak about it.
In a certain way, yeah. Again, we know that sometimes people are told, speak about it, get it out of your system. So maybe if it's done in a limited way, and in a way that it's being, let's say, guided, observed by the therapist. But if a person does that too much, then on the contrary, they're generating this to come up more and more. Okay, Sophie, you're in already. Wow.